From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Gail Shirazi of the Israel Judaica section here at the library. Welcome to today's program, Violins of Hope, co-sponsored by the European Division, the Hebrew Language Table at the Library of Congress, in cooperation with the Czech Embassy and the Rabin Chair at George Washington University. Two announcements before we start. Please shut your cell phones off or silence them. And the second one is that we are being webcast. And the part that will be scanning the audience is a question and answer period. So if you don't want to be webcast and appear on the LC website, you can leave the room, stand in the corner, but just so you should know. Speaking of violins, I just want to mention that the Library of Congress has musical instrument collections. Our first collection was 5 violins of Antonio Stradivari. So we have 5, we may have more now, Stradivarius violins here at LC. There's also a collection given to the library by the King of Thailand in 1960. To learn more about these instruments and other wonderful collections and treasures at LC, you can Google www.loc.gov. This program was a truly cooperative effort. I would like to thank Grant Harris and Erica Spencer of the European Division, Jennifer Gavin and Donna Urshel of our Public Affairs Office, Galina Tevorovsky of the Israeli Judaica section, Mary Fetzko and the Embassy of the Czech Republic, and Professor Walter Reich of GW University, and of course, Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein, our presenters, and our violinist, Hannah Tarley. It is a true honor to have these talented artists with us today. Amnon, a master violin maker, his son, Avshalom, third-generation luthier, and Hannah Tarley, a world-renowned violinist who just arrived this morning from New York, and she has to leave at 2 because she has a performance she's giving in New York tonight. So thank you very much, Hannah, for above and beyond. She started playing the violin at age 2 and gave her first performance at age 4. She's the founder and artistic director of Notes by the Bay, a new children's summer music festival in California. And if you'd like to know some more information about her, there's some sheets in the back and some up front, because her accomplishments are too great to mention. Through their work with the violins, these dedicated and amazing individuals are giving voices to millions murdered in the Holocaust. We will start with a presentation by Amnon, then Avshalom, and in between, Hannah will be playing. First, we have some opening remarks by Pavla Velickinova. Did I do okay? Okay. Head of Public Diplomacy Department at the Embassy of the Czech Republic. And then we'll start our formal program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It is the greatest pleasure and honor indeed to be here in the name of our embassy, and as originally the ambassador was supposed to be here and he sends his big apologies because one congressman only confirmed last minute meeting with him, and our new ambassador has been here for a week precisely. Right, so sorry about that, really. Violins of Hope, for me, in general, the terms of music and Holocaust seem to be actually impossible to unite. And I love the title because that's what I feel when I think about Holocaust and music in connection. I feel that must have brought hope, and it must have been a hope for survival and a better world. Being Czech, I immediately think about Czech composers or Jewish Czech composers that were stationed in Theresienstadt, and there were about 9 or 10 of them, and as you probably know, Terezin was it was a special case in the Nazi camp system because it was the camp on show, the ghetto on show, so it was also a mean of Nazi propaganda. So that's why the music was also played over there, and there was a large number of musicians and artists in Terezin. So the Nazis used them very, in the Nazi way, and they even did documentaries about this artistic part of the ghetto, of the example of ghetto. The Terezin composers, Pavel Haas, Gideon Klein, Hans Krasa, and Viktor Ullmann, we had several years ago, I think 2014, we had a very nice concert called Phoenix from the Ashes, and it was the music by these composers, and it was one of the strongest evenings we had at the embassy until now. To conclude, seeing these beautiful instruments, I'm thinking about one Holocaust survivor that I've met some years ago in London, Alice Herz-Sommer. She was a pianist, she was in Terezin, and she died at the age of 110 years. 3 years ago in London. She was an example of positivity and very funny. And that's immediately my thoughts tonight, if you permit, if you let me, are with her. And of course, I'm looking forward to hear Amnon and Avshalom's stories and Anna's beautiful performance. Thank you, and thank you, Gail.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am very honored to be here in the Library of Congress. I'm afraid I may sound too pompous in English, so I will not tell you how excitedly I am to be here today. Let me go into more solid ground and present to you our project, Violins of Hope. I would like to start with a personal story. My history with music started 100 years ago. In 1915, my father was a little boy in a shtetl in East Poland when he first time heard the sound of a violin. A klezmer troupe arrived there to play for a wealthy wedding, and while all the children sat under the tables trying to get some sweets, Moishele, my father, was hypnotized by the music. He approached the violinist and since then never stopped to love and to live music. A few days later, the klezmer took leave, and so did Moishele. He followed the wagon and the horses of the klezmer out of town, just like the story of the flutist of Hamelin. His mother, my grandmother, Esther, looked for him everywhere until somebody said that the boy followed the musicians. Well, young people ran after the wagon, caught the little boy, and for many days everyone gossiped about the punishment the boy got. Also about the violin he was given to play with. And he played. He learned to play all by himself and later studied in Vilna. This is how little Moishele was introduced to the Jewish musical tradition of the era. This is how he joined many prodigal boys and girls, some who became the greatest virtuosos of Europe. The day that my father got his first rather simple violin, Violins of Hope project was born, symbolically. As a young boy in Tel Aviv, in the mid of the 40s, I remember many survivors who came to see my father at his workshop. He used to hug them and then hand them a violin and say, "Spielt a bissele." He would say those words, and they were the first word in the world that I learned in Yiddish. "Spielt a bissele," play a little bit. Soon, the guest and my father were sitting and crying a bit, laughing a bit, and playing the violins like they would never stop. As a little boy who started taking violin lesson with a teacher, I remember asking one guest, how did he play without notes and books of music? "And the birds," he answered, "do they sing with notes?" By the way, a very funny history I've had of this time, because all these klezmer, they knew to play and to imitate birds. And my father had a cat in the workshop, and every time that one of them came over, we asked him to imitate a bird. And they've done it super. At the moment the cat heard the sound, she was going like crazy in all the workshop to look after the bird. Years later, an experienced violin maker, I met Daniel Schmidt of Dresden, East Germany, who came to study with me in Tel Aviv and became a close friend. Daniel knew a little of the Holocaust. He didn't learn it in school. Israel is different. The Holocaust is present everywhere and all the time with most people. Daniel was curious and soon met musicians who immigrated from Germany in 1936. This is when Bronislaw Huberman and Arturo Toscanini established the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra. Huberman auditioned Jewish musicians who lost their position in German orchestras, and those saved their lives and their violins. The truth is that most Jewish violinists play on German-made instruments, which were considered the very best at that time. By the way, Huberman was a wunderkind, and as a child of 9, performed the difficult concerto of the composer Johannes Brahms. Brahms sat in the audience, and rumors are saying that the old composer was touched to tears. In the last century, the violin was considered almost a Jewish instrument, popular in wedding and the most in young boys' education. So many boys were forced to take violin lessons at the age of 5, and quite a few grew to be world famous. When Isaac Stern was asked why so many Jews play the violin, he said, "It is the instrument which is the easiest to pick up and run." As we know, many didn't manage to run and to pick up the violins. Many were killed and their instrument confiscated by the Nazis. In fact, the Nazis confiscated thousands of violins, violas, and cellos of Jewish families, while quite a few instruments were famously Italian-made. Most were very cheap, made purposely for klezmers and amateurs. It is impossible to return confiscated musical instruments to their rightful owner. There are hardly way to identify simple violin and prove that they once upon a time, before that horrible war, belonged to Jewish families. But there is no doubt as to the rightful owner of violins decorated with one or more Star of David. They were truly owned by klezmers. To me, the cheap, unsophisticated violins which had no big names attached, so as a Stradivari or Guarneri, signified lost people. To me, they make the project Violins of Hope. To me, the lovely decorated violins have emotional value, far better than money value. One day, I got a violin broken to pieces, practically to bit and shred, all in plastic bag. It took me about a year and a half to glue its broken bone and to put them together again, to fit its head and belly and restore the sound. It was with much care and love that we brought it back to life, so it could play and reach out many people in the concert hall. Only when I glued all the part, I discovered that this is a beautiful. It is decorated with 5 Star of David, made by Jacob Zimmerman, a Jewish maker who worked in Warsaw. It was probably made for a klezmer and played outside in rain and freezing snow, a witness to many horrible sins. By the way, Jacob Zimmerman was a teacher and mentor of my father. I must confess that each time I finish to restore a violin, I feel nervous, holding back my breath, until the minute I hear the first note being played. Once the sound is heard, I start breathing again. It feels like a birth of a new child, well, almost. After World War II, when the horse became common knowledge and survivors arrived to Israel, there was a general boycott of German-made goods, so much so that the name of Germany was not mentioned on the radio. In this atmosphere, violinists refused to play on German-made instruments. Many came to my father and said, "If you don't buy the violin, I'm going to break it. I will never touch it again." My father, who loved each and every violin, bought many instruments, violins, viola, cellos, in order to save their lives, yet realized that he could never sell them again. This is how we developed a big collection of German-made instruments of first rate. Back to my student, Daniel. He asked me one day to give a lecture at the annual German and Violin and Bow Makers Association. He asked me and I refused. This went on for about 2 years, until 1999. In Dresden, when I presented the German Association with 200 photos of violins and many more anecdotes and stories. Since then, for the past 20 years, I cannot stop talking about my collection, now sharing it with my son Avshalom, a collection of unsaleable violins. My father used to say that all the children should learn music and practice the violin. People who play the violin, he believed, cannot be evil and violent. Well, history proved him wrong, as many Germans who worship music were involved in so many atrocities. But he was a naive believer, my father. But sometimes it is naive people who make difference in this world. Listen to this story. Ilona Feher was a Hungarian violin virtuoso who somehow managed to stay and survive. When she arrived in Israel, she could not adapt to the life in our country and land, and she was unable to perform on stage. Ilona was desperate. She came to my father in tears. "You must give violin lessons to teach the new generation of Jewish wunderkind that in time will become virtuosos. You must continue the tradition of many violinists who killed in Europe," he said. And she listened, and soon gave listen to 6 years old Pinchas Zuckerman, Shmuel Ashkenazi, Shlomo Mintz, Chagai Shacham, and so many other Israeli legends. We named the project Violins of Hope, violins with history and personal stories. Many save actual lives. Some violins survive while their owners perish. Some were hidden in the attic. One was buried under the snow. One was thrown out from a cattle train in France. Some came from Poland and Romania, some from Holland, many from Germany and Austria. One violin was played in the main orchestra in Auschwitz. All of them are restored as the best we can, and all 64 of them today play in concert in Europe and America. 2 years ago, our violins played in unforgettable concert with the Berliner Philharmoniker in remembrance of 70 years to the liberation of Auschwitz. We also play concert in Charlotte, North Carolina, Cleveland, and lately Sarasota at Jacksonville, Florida. Since the premiere concert in Istanbul, Turkey, and the concert at the Wall of Jerusalem, the violins do not quietly in their cases. After 70 years of silence, they refuse to keep quiet. Next year, they will celebrate Israel's 70th in Nashville, Tennessee. And in Birmingham, Alabama. They will also play a historical concert in Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp in Europe. They are sought by many, and soon we hope they will be exhibited and played in 10 major American cities, where educational program will be a part of their daily schedule as part of Exhibition International. Last December, the project was awarded with 2 medals of honor by the German government. This is also a piece of hope. I would like to finish with 2 stories that inspire our concerts. These are the stories of Alma Rosé and Elie Wiesel. Alma Rosé was born to musical royalty in Vienna. Her father was a famous violinist, and composer Gustav Mahler was her uncle. Alma was a beautiful and talented violinist who conducted a little orchestra of young women that traveled all over Europe. When time changed, she became the conductor of the women orchestra in Auschwitz. As such, she managed to save the lives of many women prisoners, but failed to save herself. In her memory, I would like to read to you a short paragraph of her biography. It took place while she was sick in the camp's hospital. Block 10, Birkenau. After dark, a woman prisoner named Magda handed a violin to Alma Rosé, a new inmate in Block 10. 40 years later, Magda remembered. When all were quiet, Alma began to play. Without word, she transported the prisoner of Block 10 to the world outside Auschwitz, far from hate and inhumanity. Her music blossomed into memories of family, home, holiday, and happy times. The locks on the barrack door melted. The operating room, the SS doctors, the muffled sound of the execution yard disappeared. Beauty have long forgotten dream in Block 10 until that night. Nobody there could have dreamed of such beauty as her playing that moment. By the way, the only recording left of Alma Rosé is the Bach double concerto, which she played together with her father, Arnold Rosé. Now, Elie Wiesel. A few months ago, Elie Wiesel, a writer, political active, and Nobel laureate, and most of all, an Ichpatnik, warm-hearted person and survivors, passed away. As a child in Sziget, Romania, he took violin lessons, and he used to go to the teacher with his violin case and a bottle of Chutka, local vodka. Fortunately for the little Elie, his lessons lasted only as long as there was vodka left, not too long. Not so many years later, Wiesel met Jülich, a concert violinist. They were on the death march, cramped for the freezing night in a small barn with many inmates. Then miracle happened. Jülich took out his violin and played the violin Beethoven concerto. This was Jülich's finale. As the next morning, he was found dead. Wiesel told his sad story in his famous book, The Night that he got the Nobel Prize. I would like to conclude with the Hebrew prayer, עושה שלום ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. תודה רבה. Actually, now is the turn of my son, and he will take the podium. רגע.
Good afternoon and thank you for coming today. I'm Avshalom Weinstein, Amnon's son, third generation violin maker in Israel. And I'll present you some of the instruments that you see here today, and I'll tell you some of the stories of them. We will start with this instrument. As I'm sure many of you know, some of the most famous violinists in the world during the 20th century were Jewish. Yasha Hefetz, Isaac Stern, and many others. But we only know about 3 or maybe 4 Jewish violin makers during this time. This violin, for example, was made by Yaakov Zimmerman, the mentor of my grandfather. We know from stories when we spoke to Ida Handel and Michel Schwalbe, who used to be the concertmaster of the Berlin Philharmonic for many years under Karajan, and recorded some of the best masterpieces, which until today considered to be some of the best recording ever. They were both his clients. Michel Schwalbe, who was coming from a very poor family, he told my father that when he was young, he would get his instruments and repairs by Zimmerman for free. Ida Handel remembered him as a very old man during the 30s, drinking milk all the time, probably due to a illness or something. We have no idea what happened to him during the Holocaust. We assume he passed away. He was already probably over his 70s when the war started. But we have a few instruments of his which survived. One of them we have here today with us. This is a very unique instrument. I don't know if most of you could see it, but you could see it afterwards. It has a very small data here inlaid on the back. And the label inside is written in Yiddish. And it's read, I made this violin for my loyal friend, Mr. Shimon Korngold, Warsaw, 1924, Yaakov Zimmerman. When my father asked Michel Schwalbe if he heard the name Shimon Korngold, he said yes. He said, we were so poor, we didn't feel comfortable bringing the violin teacher home. And his violin lessons used to be in Shimon Korngold's house. Shimon Korngold was a wealthy industrialist in Warsaw, and when the war started, he took his violin and he ran away. He managed to arrive to Tashkent, Uzbekistan, where he fell ill and passed away, most probably from typhus. He gave his violin to his closest friend, and after the war, in around 1946-47, this friend came to the Korngold family in Jerusalem. He knocked on the door and asked, do you know Mr. Shimon Korngold? They said, yes, we do. We haven't heard from him for many years. It's our uncle. And he gave them the violin. We also have a photo of Shimon playing on this violin in his house in Warsaw. And these are basically the only things which are left for Mr. Korngold. We got this violin.
There is a photo of Mr. Korngold inside this booklet of photographs?
You can see it later. There is a booklet here. You'll be able to see the photo. We have enlarged it. We got it from the family. And as I mentioned, Yaakov Zimmerman was not the only one. We know of another violin maker, Jewish violin makers. His name was Jacob Hackert. We have one of his violins here. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring all the instruments today. Jacob Hackert was born in the Netherlands. He went to Mirecourt, France, to the violin making school there. Later on, he did his apprenticeship around Europe and in Germany, coming back to Rotterdam, where he opened his workshop. He had later on a very successful string factory who was making strings, and he made a booklet of all the reviews he got from the leading musicians of the time. Later on, his factory was converted to make medical supplies. It was the same tools used to make violin strings, instrument strings, and medical supply. And when the war started, his family managed to run away. But Jacob Hackert was caught by the Nazis, later on deported to Auschwitz, and he was killed on the 22nd of May 1944. We have some of his instruments who survived. We have the first violin he ever made in Mirecourt still in 1906. There is a cello of his. We do know of some other instruments. We have some photo of his in his workshop, and there is a very, very beautiful miniature violin about this big, which he made. He made the violin, the bow, which you can actually use, and the case. And this is a very, very unique and very beautiful instrument, and it can show you the level and skill of Mr. Hackert. Now, we have another violin maker. His name is Weinstein. He worked in Germany, in Istanbul as well, and later on moved to New York. But these are the only three makers that we know. And unlike many of the Jewish violinists, they are considered to be very small and not many people know about them.
So I just want to say, first of all, is it this one or is it not this one? How happy I am to be here, and I'm just, it's amazing being a part of this project. It's been an incredible experience. And every time I hear these stories and then I have to go up and play it, I have to kind of compose myself, because, you know, it takes a second to sort of take all of this in and to hear these stories, and I got, you know, goosebumps, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I actually have to play this now. When we talk about playing violins, and very often, you know, when you think about violin or music in general, it's about presenting your voice, it's about singing, and it's about, you know, whatever kind of unique, whatever is unique about you and about your instruments, that is what you're putting together. And with these violins, I feel like that is especially true when I play them, you know, when they're talked about. It's really very special to talk about the voices that are being presented here. And the four excerpts that I'm going to be playing for you today, I feel really show that in sort of the best way. So the first piece that I'm going to play is by Rachmaninoff, and it's the Vocalise.
From what we know, most of the German violin makers and bow makers were not in the Nazi party. Many of them, of course, had Jewish clients. Some of them even helped Jewish people either by buying the instruments from them, this way providing them some money so they can escape, or even hiding them at home. But, as you can see here on this violin, some were Nazi sympathizer. This violin, which was actually bought a few years ago by a violin maker around here from Washington, D.C., he bought it, and his initial thought was to take the violin, do some reparation, probably sell it. And when he opened the violin, he saw this. Heil Hitler, 1936, with this very strong and aggressive swastika. His first feeling was to take the violin and burn it, and then he did what most of us would do today, opened up his computer, went to Google, and somehow he managed to find us. He gave a call to my father and asked him if he would like to have this violin in our collection. We said immediately yes, and he was so kind and sent it over to us. And this is one of a very small amount of instruments which will never be repaired and will stay as it is, to show what people could have done. When we took a closer look on the violin, there was no reason to repair it. When the guy opened it in 1936, he didn't do any reparation. There are no cracks. There are no pieces which were replaced. The only reason he opened this violin is to write this horrible thing, and then later he closed it, either gave it back to the owner or sold it, we have no idea. We couldn't locate the name of the guy. His initials are AD, but we couldn't find his name in any of the dictionaries and any of our books. We don't know what was his name. We know it's coming from Germany, but that's it. Many of the German makers, and who were some of the leading makers of the time, after the war, people didn't want to play on their instruments. Many of the Jewish players, they either sold or destroyed their instruments. And only today, after so many years, they start getting again the recognition that they used to have, those German makers, as being really some of the leading makers of the time. And people today are looking for these instruments. And when Daniel Schmidt, when he came to our workshop in Israel and he saw the collection and he saw the instrument, this beautiful German-made instruments, he was quite shocked, because these instruments you could not find in Germany in this time. It was very rare to see them, and many of them, they were in a way lost in Germany. And only today people start understanding the quality and how good makers most of these people were. This next violin has a very unique story. This violin was played in the main orchestra in Auschwitz. Auschwitz, as you know, was the biggest camp. It had about 8 orchestras. There were men orchestra, there was the women orchestra, which was led by Alma Rosé. Alma managed to save all the players of the orchestra. They all survived, but Alma, unfortunately, a few months before the war ended, she passed away, either from poisoning or from typhus, nobody knows. There are so many stories about her orchestra, but one of the most interesting one is there was an inspection of Mengele in the hospital. And as you know, most of the people who went into the hospital, it was kind of a one-way trip, and many of them were sent to death. And he was going around and he saw this very sick lady, and he asked, why is she still here? Why is she still alive? And the people said, well, she's a part of the women orchestra. I said, just okay, and he went to the next patient. She had this kind of a halo of someone who was respected, And from what we know today, she is the only person that the Germans actually called her in her name. They would call her, they would address her as Frau Rose, Mrs. Rose. The only person we know that she was actually called by name. Auschwitz had the main orchestra who played very close to the Arbeit macht frei sign. They would play every day in the morning when the inmates would go out to work, and in the evening when they would come back. They would pile the dead just in front of the orchestra. Many people who played in these camps couldn't play afterwards. They couldn't have had the power to play an instrument after seeing everything they used to see while playing. There were people, and there are stories about people playing on the way to the gas chambers. They would see their families sent to the gas chambers. They would lay down their instrument and join their families. The Nazis used music also as a deception tool. When the trains would arrive to the camps, there would be a small orchestra playing, and we heard some testimonies of survivors saying that when they were going out from the train, sometime after days and days stuffed in a cattle wagon with no food and no water and no sanitarity and no break and with many deads inside, they would go out and they would hear music. And they would actually think to themselves, well, if there is music here, how bad can it be? And of course, they learned very, very fast how bad it could be. And this violin, which we got a few years ago, we were told that the guy who brought it, the father of the person who brought it to us, he was a soldier in the Jewish brigade, and after the war he was going around and trying to help survivors to get papers and start their life again. He met a survivor, and the guy told him, he said, listen, I have nothing, all my family is killed, I have nothing left, only this violin. Would you please buy it from me? He bought it for $50, which was more than 10 times the price of an instrument of this kind. And he hoped that his son, who was just born, will hopefully one day play the violin. Unfortunately, he never did. And a few years ago, when he heard about our project, he brought it to us. And since then, this violin was played in all our concerts, sometimes by the soloist, sometimes by the concertmeister. The concertmeister of Cleveland Symphony played it. It was played in the concert of Berlin by the soloist Guy Braunstein, and lately by the soloist Alexei Kenny in our concert in Jacksonville, Florida. And today you'll hear it now.
So the next piece that I'm going to play is a movement from a partita by Bach. And when you're learning pieces, when you're learning new material, it's mostly always about, what did the composer want? What was the composer thinking about? What was going on, in his life? And that's, as students and as teachers, that's always something that we're thinking about the most. It's, what came from kind of the original? Where is this music coming from? But I feel like today, in this room with these violins, we have to change that a little bit. And today, it's not about the composers, it's about the instruments. And it's about how the instrument wants to play a certain piece. And I, of course, will help the instrument show its voice. But in a way, I think that makes it very special, because you communicate the instrument on a whole different level. So this will be a movement from Bach.
This next violin has a very interesting story. Feivel Weininger was a Romanian Jew, and when the war started, he was deported with tens of thousands of other Jewish people to an area called Transnistria in Romania. They were sent there by the government, knowing that they won't have enough means to survive as food and supply. And many, tens of thousands of them passed away. When Feivel arrived with his family and his 1.5 years old daughter, Helen, she was so weak she couldn't even cry anymore. He arrived to the place and he met a judge who knew him from before. The judge knew that he was a violinist, and he told him, he said, listen, I have this violin, this very precious old Italian instrument made by an Amati. Would you please take it? Maybe if you have some work, if you can play a little bit, if you earn something, maybe you can share it with me and my sister. Feivel, of course, was very grateful. He took the violin, and after his first work, where he would get the leftovers of the party, he went back to the judge's house, but he saw that he was too late. A few days before that, the judge and his sister, who couldn't bear it anymore, hanged themselves and died. Feivel kept the violin for a long time, playing around for the villagers in small events, and his payout would be some leftover food, some firewood, and this way he managed to keep his family of 16 people alive. A while later, the police heard that he has this precious violin, and they came over and gave him a choice. Either you give us the violin or we take away your family. He didn't hesitate and gave them the Amati violin. And days later, when one of the villagers from the area around came to him and said, would you please come and play in my daughter's wedding? He said, I would love to do that, but I have no instrument. The guy said, well, that's not a big problem. Come with me, we will find you one. They went to the villages around and they found this violin. Feivel took it. He insisted on paying later on the guy back. He played, of course, in his daughter's wedding and in many, many other places. And this way he managed to gather enough food and supply, and him and his 16 family members survived the war. When they came back to Israel, when they arrived to Israel after the war, Feivel would take his violin every day out, play on it, and tell his little daughter Helen, who survived, all the stories and all the things that he was going through with this instrument and before that. Years later, when Feivel was 90 years old, his daughter asked him what he would like to have for his birthday. He said, I would like to play my friend again. He wouldn't call the violin my violin, he would call it my friend. Helen came to my father and we saw the instruments. It was in a very poor condition, a very simple instrument, and we offered her maybe to take another violin for her father to play on. And when he heard the offer, he said, well, you don't understand, it's not just a violin, it's my friend, I want to play on this violin. She came back to us, she told us the story, we repaired the violin, and he got it back when he was 90 years old, smiling like a little child. He would take it out every day, play on it, talk to it. He couldn't really play much, he was very old, very sick, but he would sit down and talk to the violin and tell it stories. And a few years ago, after unfortunately he passed away, we got the violin from Helen, and we have it in our collection since then.
So this next piece will be by one of my favorite composers, Dvorak. And this is actually one of his, he has 3 pieces for violin. It's a ballad, a nocturne, and a mazurka, and I'm going to play part of the ballad. And of course, this is singing with the instrument. This is bringing out the voice of the instrument and really connecting my voice with the instrument's voice. And I really love this story about this man and the violin that was his friend. I think it's such a touching story, and it kind of gets me every time I hear it. So this is Dvorak, and hopefully the violin and I, we're gonna be friends right now.
the last story for today, we have this violin. As you can see, it has a very big Star of David, and this violin was done in Schönbach, a place which was, I think, also a part of the Czech Republic during some time before the war, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And in this area they made many instruments. Some of them were decorated, some with Star of David, some with crosses, some with other ornaments. They used to sell them around Europe. Many were played by gypsies, not the ones with Star of David, but others. And they would play them, and then someone would come and they would say, oh, it's such a beautiful violin, and he would tell him like a story, and he would ask, can I buy the violin? He said, no, it's my grandfather's, and blah, 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 blah. Take a really high price, sell the violin 2 minutes later, tell his son, okay, bring me the next one. And they would go on like that. Now, this violin, it's dedicated to the Bielski family. I'm coming from both sides of the Holocaust. My father's side, my grandmother and my grandfather both had 11 brothers and sisters, and them and only one uncle survived the war. The rest of our family from my father's side were all killed. My grandmother and my grandfather from my mother's side are from the complete opposite story. My grandfather, Asoel Bielski, who was one of the Bielski brothers. I don't know if you might have seen the movie Defiance. It gives kind of a taste of the story, unfortunately not exactly how it was. And him and his two brothers saved over 1,200 people. They saved them in the forest in Belarus, living in very harsh conditions, surrounded by Germans and many other people who were all the time trying to have them arrested and killed. They would fight the Germans, but they would also save many, many people. My grandfather, after the war, after they were liberated, he joined the Russian army and later was killed in Germany. But his brothers immigrated to Israel and later on moved to the States. And one of the recent comers to Washington, D.C., that I'm sure some of you all know, Gerald Kushner, both his grandmother and grandfather were saved by the Bielski partisans. When I grew up and I would go to my grandmother in Haifa, the bedtime stories would be the stories of the partisans. I heard them since I was a little child, and unlike my mother's side of the family, my father's side, my grandmother and my grandfather never spoke a single word about their family, about what was going on. They arrived to Israel in 1938, before the war, and none of the uncles and all our aunts, none of them survived except of one. So this is the last violin for today. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll have time for questions if anyone has. And we hope now that we are trying to have this big project to go to have a big exhibition, but mainly also an educational program. Traveling in the US and the world. And in January, February, when we've been to Jacksonville and to Sarasota, we had more than 10 or 12,000 students coming to presentations very similar to what we had here today. They would hear the stories, listen to the music, because in a way it's a very unique project. You can hear a story, you can hear the violin, they would come afterwards and they would see the violin up in person, ask questions, and it's something we cannot really understand the Holocaust. Nobody have ever seen 6 million people together. But when you are talking about individual stories, individual people coming from one place, going to another place, managing to survive somehow, to live yet another day, it gives you, in a way, a different perspective of a time that maybe one day we will be able to understand, and hopefully we will never have to experience again.
So the last piece that I will be playing today will be two movements, two dances basically, from Bartok's Romanian dances, or folk dances. And I just thought that in this violin, this is the klezmer violin. Yeah, so this is the klezmer violin. I just thought to play it, with folk dances would be an appropriate kind of duet.
Time for a few questions.
Yes.
And repeat the question.
I want to thank you for this is holy work to me, what you're doing, and I wanted to just show my gratitude for it.
Thank you very much.
I have a comment and a question. My first comment was, I have a friend who's a very accomplished violin teacher, and he has a great story I wanted to share. His teacher was named Robert Gurla, and he was hiding in an attic. And the Russians found him, and they found him with the violin. And they were going to kill him. And they asked him to play Tchaikovsky. And the soldiers started crying. The violin saved his life. So I want to share that story because it goes along with that. My question is there any hope with the stolen goods, tracing back stolen goods, that you will ever get that Amadi that you talked about?
Well,
just a question.
The question was about trying to recover instruments. So the main problem is that when the Nazis confiscated musical instruments, and violin in particular, the data would go violin made out of wood, color, whatever, and that's it. And it's unlike a painting that you say a woman standing with a flower vase with a window behind. It's almost impossible to trace because there are so many instruments which were made very, very similar. Most of them like we said before, they are not from the important makers.
That's Kimura, right?
And
Kimura.
unfortunately, I don't think we can locate them. There was a woman who was trying to locate few instruments. I don't know, as far as I know, she couldn't manage to find. And it's very, very hard to try and trace them because there is not enough data, basically.
How would you compare the wood, the selection of wood, between these various instruments and ranges?
Well, the wood which we use for violins, the top is always made out of spruce. The ribs, back and scroll, usually the instruments that you see here and most of the instruments are made out of maple, flamed maple. Sometime out of beechwood and some very few out of different other woods which were grown up in Italy. But most of the instruments, I would say even more than 90%, the ribs, back and scroll are made of maple.
First of all, thank you for taking the trouble to come. I like to talk tachlis because the violins will teach. When Yitzhak Perlman was Isaac Perlman was alive.
Isaac Stern.
Isaac Stern and Yitzhak.
Maybe you should face everybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And louder if you don't mind.
I wish I could. There are the great violinists here teach. They also, as you know from Dick Pavla and other people, are very generous. You need to ask them to adopt this project.
Well, let me tell you one thing. Yitzhak Perlman was born in a street behind our workshop. His first violin that he ever got was from my grandfather. They made now a documentary about him, and he's playing the Auschwitz violin. He played the Schindler List on that for the movie. He does know the project. Hopefully he will take part of it. We'll see.
They have called on all of the great philanthropists of this country.
Yes, I know.
I worked with them on projects, but this one is very special because I don't know a school in the country that would not want to participate. And as the founding vice chairman of the Holocaust Museum, we know what distance learning is about. And as you know from what you have said already, the level of pedagogy, of kids absorbing when they see the real thing, is 1,000,000%.
Yeah, because
So
they
the
post it up and they tweet it, and you get communicated very, very well and fast.
My major point is that these violins, as what I have called the precious legacy of those who owned it and didn't survive, will live on in teaching that no one can do otherwise. So
This is our main
your
hope.
labor,
Yes.
your labor is what you've done already. And it seems to me that those who have the possibilities to really help you will do it if asked.
Well, I hope so. Yeah.
I want to thank you for this presentation. It has meant so much to me because this summer I will be going to visit Auschwitz for the first time in my life, as well as a couple other concentration camps on a special tour I'll be taking. I will be very happy to take your information with me and share it with the people that I will be touring with, because I don't know any of them yet, but I'm sure they will be very interested to learn about this as well.
We'll talk about it afterwards. I'll give you a card gladly. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Yes?
I know it's hard to generalize, but the majority of the instruments, what type of shape were they in before restoration, and was most of the varnish remaining intact?
Well, the question was, what was the condition of the instruments when we got it? Well, some instruments, they were in very poor condition. You could see that some of them were played outside when the varnish of the top was gone. Basically, the only thing which would stay would be the color. Some of them were broken to pieces. We have one which is so badly done and so poorly repaired that we left it as it is, so people can see that they had to do everything they could just in order to be able to play another day and hopefully survive another day, even if it meant to repair the instruments in a way that they would never think of doing before, but they actually had no other choice.
Another question? Yes?
You mentioned your grandfather, Soil Belsky. Can you tell me the names of the other two brothers involved as the partisans? And also, are any brothers or any Belsky brothers still alive today?
Unfortunately, Tuvia Bielski was chosen as the leader. He was the elder. And my grandfather was the head of the fighting unit, Asoel Bielski. There was another brother, Zeus, who was he was the head of the intelligence, Zusia. They had another little brother who was 13 years old, Aaron Bielski. He's the only one who's still alive.
And sister, Marsha?
And
You mentioned performing in Nashville, and I'm wondering what the next events your organization has in the United States.
We are going to have a very big project in Nashville next year, starting on the 22nd of March until 28th of May, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to include a few concerts. During this time, we are going to have 2 concerts in Birmingham, Alabama, on the 12th and on the 14th of April. In the States right now, we have many people who are asking for projects. We have nothing finalized yet. We are hoping to start our big project sometime in around the fall of 2018, if we can manage to gather all the money and all the funds, and then slowly start touring all around. We have many offers to do in San Francisco, from Los Angeles, from Chicago, from Washington area, from New York, Phoenix, and probably another 10 places, but I'm sorry I don't remember them all right now.
Thank you.
I want to add one Bielski who lived with the partisans, and her daughters are sitting here.
One of my cousins, Taibe, one of the grandkids from one of the daughters of the Bielski brothers, is here with us today. Two of them, yeah. Well, I have a big family, I don't remember them now. And my mother, yes, Asaela.
Any more questions?
I'd like to thank our musician. I don't remember her name.
Hannah Tarley.
We know a little bit about her, and what you do now, where you play, where you train.
And how you hooked up.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, it was a real pleasure for me to come here today. I really love participating in this project. Like I said before, we actually met quite recently. I was part of the Sarasota Violins of Hope, because I'm actually part of the promo music program, and you mentioned the Czech promo before, and that's actually how we got connected. They called me and asked me if I wanted to, or they emailed me, and they're like, there's this project with these violins from the Holocaust, would you be interested? I was like, yeah, where do I go, when, when is this happening? Well, I'm from California originally. I'm first generation American born. My family is also from Russia, Belarus, Poland, from this area. And also, the same sort of stories of mom's side of the family were able to get out like minutes before the Germans came. Dad's side of the family were like killed, and it's sort of a similar, everybody I guess has this mix in the families. At the moment, I live in New York, and I'm doing a master's degree at the Juilliard School. So that's why I came from New York this morning.
I've got one question for Amnon. How did you convince, let me say into the phone. How did you convince Avshalom to also become a violin maker? I would love my son to have gone into my husband's business. It didn't work. How did you do it?
First of all, you should ask how I am a violin maker. So that's natural. I followed my father, and he's following his father. That's it. Very simple. I wanted to add to the concert. 1 month from now, we are doing a project in Bucharest, Romania. And February 18, we are going to do something very special in Dachau, in the concentration camp. So that's also on the programs that we have now.
Okay, no questions? Thank you very much for coming in. Really an amazing program. Thank you, Amnon, Avshalom, and Hannah, for giving of your time, your talents, and your love. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.